Good evening. My name is Harish Khare. I am the current chair of the Media Foundation. Welcome to the first edition of Media Foundation Dialogues. We are extremely gratified to have the India International Center as a partner. This partnership is a testimony to the India International Center's continued commitment to liberal values and democratic arrangements. And we are grateful to the IIC for hosting the dialogue on its website. The Media Foundation, it may be recalled, was conceived and set up by V.G. Varghese and other high-minded editors and journalists in the mid-1970s. The initiative was spurred on by the experience of journalists during the internal emergency days. Varghese Saab and others were deeply impacted as to ease with which the government of the day could deny the media its autonomy, its robustness, and its professional space. They were equally amazed and perturbed that all too many in the media were willing to fall in line with the government's demands and diktats. When the Media Foundation was born, it was very much the age of the newspaper. Then came television with its own excitement and excitability, redefining news, how it was conceived, and how it was to be received. And now there is a new kid on the block, the social media and various digital platforms, all with their own rules and sometimes their own lawlessness. The foundation in the past has launched a media website, The Hoot, one of the first media monitoring websites in India, which for over 15 years was perhaps the most respected media watch site in the country. The foundation also published a number of books dealing with the media issues. To its traditional activity of awarding the annual Chameli Devi Jain Award for an outstanding woman journalist, the Media Foundation has most recently added a new initiative conceived as a new conversation site called the Media Foundation Dialogues. The primary inspiration behind the dialogues is that in this fast-moving world of journalism, there was the acutely felt need to restate some basic fundamental principles and values of a free and professional media, and to look at the role of the media, issues of probity, issues of accountability, issues of ethics that not only concern the media or ought to, but the public as well. In our first Media Foundation dialogue, we focus on the digital media and regulation norms. I invite Shuma, Raha, our executive member and a senior journalist, to introduce the subject, tell us a bit about our distinguished panelists, and moderate the first Media Foundation IIC dialogues. Over to you, Shuma.
Thank you, Mr. Khare. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the first edition of the Media Foundation IIC Dialogues. So the conversation around regulation in the streaming platforms and digital news media has been going on for a while, but it has kind of picked up momentum, as it were, since last month when the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting brought the streaming services, also called the OTTs, as well as digital news media under its ambit. Now, while this move was not entirely unexpected, it has raised concerns that perhaps the government wishes to play a more direct role and maybe wants to control these two sectors some more. So now, certainly in the last few weeks, multiple voices from the government have been talking about the need to control digital media, or not control, but regulate digital media. They've said things like, they should not, the OTTs should not have unlimited freedom in, OTTs should not have unlimited freedom with regards to their content and so on. And as far as digital news media is concerned, last month the government also brought out a notification, which was really a reinforcement of an earlier announcement made last year, which said that FDI in digital news would be capped at 26%, subject to government approval. Now, this is a fairly major restriction, given that earlier FDI in news media, online news media, could potentially be 100%. So the question is, should online content, whether news or entertainment, should it be subject to regulations over and above the existing laws of the land? And if so, what kind of regulation should it be? And would it or would it not impact the freedom of expression, creative freedom, and the independence of these platforms? And also, would it limit viewer choice and basically hurt the interests of the consumer? Now, to discuss and debate all these issues, we have a wonderful panel here with us today. There's Nikhil Pahwa, founder of Medianama, which is a technology policy website, tracks technology policy developments. Mr. Jawhar Sircar, the former CEO of Prasar Bharati and former secretary at the Ministry of Culture. Dhanya Rajendran, the founder of News Minute and also the chairperson of DG Pub, which is an association of several digital news portals. And Mr. Tarun, CEO of C5, which is a streaming platform, and also the chairperson of the Digital Entertainment Committee of the Internet and Mobile Association of India. A very warm welcome to all the panelists. So I'll go to Nikhil Pahwa first, and let's begin by focusing on the OTTs. Nikhil, broadcast television is subject to a self-regulatory regime, and that includes several, it's a fairly detailed and wide-ranging content guidelines. So why is it problematic if a similar kind of a regulatory setup were to be applied to the streaming platforms?
Shuma, when this conversation began in 2018, there was, subsequently there was this OCCP code which streaming services had come out with, and my argument there was that if you give the government an inch, they'll take a mile, and you already see that in broadcast, right? Broadcast, frankly, is insipid. There is very little room for creativity. You find in broadcast in many instances where movies where there is an insane amount of bleeping that happens, words are censored, even subtitles are censored. So, for example, in some films, you can't even use, for example, the word breast. In case of, I think, one of the streaming services, they in a show called DuckTales, they actually even censored, like they do on TV, they censored the word ham. So, TV is quite restrictive in terms of the creative content, and frankly, that's what had basically led to a burgeoning of piracy, where people were watching, streaming and downloading and torrenting, slightly more edgy content. And frankly, there has been an expansion of what is acceptable in society, at least amongst those who watch streaming services since. So there is a fear that the government, which is trying to push this code down the throat of streaming services, and it's not a self-regulate. The code itself is not being created by them. There is a push from the government in terms of what it wants, and that's very clear even from an RTI which we had filed, that we got a response to a few days ago, where the government said that they want a regime which is similar to the broadcast code, the BCCC or the NBSA as guiding principles. It's very clear that the government is kind of dictating terms to the streaming services. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that this is the same government that in 2015 went to the Supreme Court in the Kamlesh Vaswani case and said that we don't want to regulate what you do in the privacy of your bedrooms. Uh, and this was a case that was trying to get porn banned in India. And Mukul Rohatgi said, we don't want to play model police. We don't want to control what you do in the privacy of your bedrooms, and effectively giving a green signal saying that what is private viewing is private. I don't understand how structurally and fundamentally, apart from the content, how streaming services are any different. If porn is not being censored, then why or there isn't a self-regulatory code for porn or even a regulatory code? Why is there a need for a self-regulatory code for streaming services? There is, of course, an issue that there are many court cases going on, and people have been offended by various shows that have hurt their sensibilities in one way or another. But I would argue that the right to offend is an integral part of free speech. It is what allows society to progress. You might remember that in the 90s, there were mobs out on the street about a Bollywood song that had the words sexy, sexy, sexy as a part of its lyrics. Do we get offended by the word sexy anymore? We don't. So, creativity is about challenging boundaries. And I think any kind of code that tries to regulate what people do, and obviously no one's saying that you can do something which is illegal, and there are already laws governing defamation, governing what is illegal. It's beyond that. This self-regulatory code will only make streaming services insipid. It will give encouragement to piracy. It will lead to the government having a say in what is and what isn't allowed on streaming services. And what we have seen is that this entire process is being run entirely without public participation, without citizens having a say in what they want to see and what they don't want to see. The government is telling the streaming services to put out a list of prohibitory content. They're trying to dictate what kind of a structure it should have. And it's getting its way because it's not doing a public consultation. Frankly, it doesn't have the locus to regulate streaming content. That's why it's pushing for a self-regulatory code. Apart from that, I just wanted to add that streaming services are already censoring content. Whether it's Netflix, Z5, Alt Balaji, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, they have all censored content or taken down shows. For example, Hotstar took down the controversial Coffee with Karan show with Hardik Pandya and KL Rahul. Amazon Prime censored the marvelous Mrs. Maisel in 2018. So there is censorship already happening. And I think this is an unfortunate reality that we are living with right now.
Also, isn't it a fact that the content on the streaming platforms is pulled content? It's content that you
Yes.
choose to view. It's not, something which is broadcast.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You're making a choice. You're viewing what you want to view. At best, I think what is ideal is that there needs to be detailed disclosures about what kind of a content a user might be watching, and most responsible OTT services are already doing that. In fact, that was also a part of the initial OCCP code. So I think disclosures is fine, but the government dictating terms is, I think, something which is completely uncalled for. And perhaps, maybe 10 years from now, all content viewing will be on digital media, and perhaps the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting won't have a role to play. So it's trying to figure out what it can do by trying to regulate both news content as well as digital media.
And there is also the matter about the difference between, will there be a difference between user-generated content and content which is streamed on these platforms? If you're bringing in regulation in one, it could apply to the other, right?
So that's a question that I was asking myself, Shuma, that if I'm a movie producer or a filmmaker and I publish a movie on YouTube, how is that going to be fundamentally governed by a completely different set of self-regulatory code as user-generated content, as if I license it to an entity like, let's say, Hotstar or a Z5, right? So why it will be censored on, perhaps it'll be censored on them, but it won't be censored on YouTube. So there is no difference between it. You see, on the internet, all users are equal. there is fundamentally in the IT Act no differentiation between a Z5 or a Nikhil Pahwa who's streaming his own content. In my case, if I publish something on YouTube, YouTube is the intermediary as is the ISP. And in case of Z5, the ISP is the intermediary. So whatever regulations are going to apply to a Z5 will also apply to me as a content creator. And so, that effectively means that you're restricting free speech for everyone, unless the government finds a way to change the law to try and define what a streaming service is, which I think it will be hard pressed to figure out, which is why it's going down the self-regulatory route.
Right. Thanks, Nikhil. Tarun, I'd like to go to you next. You his mic, yeah. So you wear two hats, right? I mean, you are the CEO of a streaming platform, and you're also the chairperson of the Digital Entertainment Committee of the IAMAI, which, of course, formulated the latest iteration of the self-regulatory code for the OTTs. Now, you came out with it in September, and it got very wide backing from the industry. 18 OTT players backed it, if I'm not mistaken. And yet the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting decided not to support it at that time. So could you tell us a little bit about what you were trying to do in this code and why the INB Ministry did not support it?
So what we're trying to do is basically build a common platform for everybody to understand what are really the tenets of original content curation in India. There is no attempt to define the kind of content or the kind of storytelling or the kind of creative freedom that we believe every digital video streaming platform, which is a pull platform, must have and must continue to maintain. The self-regulation code, if you've read, does 2 or 3 things, and very simple things. One, it defines a standard policy on age rating. It then defines a certain kind of descriptors that we must use for age rating. It then allows or encourages or ensures all of us as platforms use technology to do age gating. And it then builds on a 2-level of complaint mechanism that people are able to use to be able to bring in their views and hear and get heard out by the platforms themselves, and then by an external body that is comprising of the platforms as well as of civil society that has an understanding of that subject and that perspective. So that's really the limit of the self age game and able to a redressal mechanism for everybody who has views or complaints to give. One mechanism that is internal and the second mechanism that is external. To prohibited content, we haven't defined any prohibited, but we have defined the fact that we will take care of the law of the land, right? So I think as citizens of the country, we are anyway committed to making sure that we stay within the constitution and the applicable laws. So that is a commitment by us to the civil society. And that's largely all that we've done on the self-regulation code. But it's a good code that brings in a certain amount of uniformity. It balances consumer interests by providing information, by providing technology for age gating, and also allows for freedom of the creative folks for them to be able to create the kind of content that they deserve to make and the kind of stories that they deserve to tell. Now,
and yet the INB ministry did not support it.
I'm coming to that point, Shuma. I knew that you're going to get to that point. So what is our relationship with the INB ministry? We send the code to INB ministry primarily not for approval, but for making sure that they were aware and that we were on the same table when it comes to a lot of PILs that continue to get filed by IAD users who think that that OTT services and their content is hurting some kind of sentiments, right? and the ministry is called in to represent themselves as well as represent what the government should do. And so it was important that the ministry and us were aware that we have a self-regulation code and that we are working on making sure we have a redressal mechanism for some of these complaints that now become quasi-legal or legal. What is the ministry saying? The ministry is saying that they would rather have us having a stronger redressal mechanism on the tier 2, where there are more external parties involved to be able to give us better feedback, and they want to articulate the section on applicable laws. Are we going to do it? Yes, we're going to articulate the section of applicable laws, because whether we do it or not, it's anyway articulated within the constitution of this country. What we're going to do on the tier 2 is we're going to largely stay with what we have on tier 2, but we're going to bring in legal luminaries or a better understanding of what is the law of the land and what could really become crossing the line or hurting sentiments or doing something which was against the constitution of the country within our tier 2 ecosystem, so that there is a certain amount of awareness that is built on what is right and wrong, rather than taken as sacrosanct. So that's really the limited point of this self-regulation code. And I do believe if it can be done in the manner that we've envisaged, it can add a certain amount of uniformity as well as consistency in the way we deal with user complaints on original curated content.
So let me get this clear. Which means, are you bringing in a list of prohibited content? Because that is...
No, we're just bringing in the applicable laws.
The applicable laws are already there. I mean, why do you need to enumerate?
We're not going to bring them in. We're going to just list them in we eventually may end up listing them in our implementation code, but we're not bringing in any
restrictions to free speech and so on and so forth, and Article 295A and stuff like that. But and what about the complaints redressal mechanism? Because as Nikhil mentioned, an RTI application by Medianama, I think that has revealed that the ministry was leaning towards a complaints redressal mechanism more on the lines of the BCCC, which
we are continuing to stay with the 2-tier mechanism that we have created.
So what is the status of the code now? Where is it at?
It's in the implementation with all the players.
Implementation meaning that are you ready to adopt?
Make sure that it's all adopted, it's all signed. You have to make sure that all our content is age rated. We make sure that we have technology that allows for age gating. So there is a fair amount of implementation to be done on our end, because you must realize we have hours and hours of as age rated, all descriptors to be put on all that content, form our tier 2 committees, implement technology to be able to help the user gate the content.
Right. I mean, age gating, everybody wants age gating as well as content descriptors, because that helps the viewer to make an informed choice. But anything beyond that would make the content fairly, uninteresting, to put it mildly. I mean, it would severely undermine the quality of the content, the diversity of the content, and so on. So are you saying that there is then no pressure as such from the ministry to toe their line?
No.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know.
There is, there may be conversation, but there is no.
Yeah. Okay, because if they were going to push for this kind of a BCCC kind of a complaints redressal mechanism, it makes taking content down that much easier, right? And that would there have been pushback from the, hypothetically speaking, would industry pushback?
I don't know what to say about hypothesis.
Okay, all right. So anyway, so it's good to know that the code will be. So why you haven't placed it in the public domain as yet?
It has been in the public domain. It's unfortunate that even when you conduct seminars like this, you have not read it.
No, I have read it. I'm saying the modified code, because
there is no modification to the code.
Okay, the code is being accepted as it is, as you put it out in September?
Yes.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's great. So, Mr. Sircar, let me go to you. You've, of course, been in the government for many, many years, so you understand the workings, how the government's mind works. So I wanted to know from you, why did the MIB then, bring the streaming services under its purview? And it made a change in the business rules to do so, but does it still have the legal jurisdiction over these streaming platforms to be able to force them to accept its terms?
I think I need to come up with a caveat. My acquaintance with the INB ministry was first in 2009 when I was catapulted to that seat of Secretary INB for absolutely no fault of mine. And thereafter was a period when I had to struggle against that same ministry for about 5 sensible years. And in between, I was catapulted and coerced at gunpoint to take over as Secretary INB again for a brief while. The preceding and succeeding secretaries of INB took my era as not having existed. So this, you must understand that you will have to live with the government. It's something of a nuisance like the morning toilet. I mean, first of all, this one is more hegemonic than any that I have seen in my 42 years. This is genetically programmed to be hegemonic. So something like this would come out in installments between Ladakh and Galwan and this and that. So they'll keep the home fires running. This one, particularly, we need to be cautious, but not overread at the moment. An allocation of business amendment has been made. This no person who is outside the civil service, that means common sense wala common citizens, are not supposed to know. This is all grammatical gibberish that is known only to bureaucrats. This AOB is chartered between ministries as to who can do what. Now, so far, this internet or digital platforms were totally with the IT ministry that has established an unusual record of being cooperative, accepting stupid section that they inserted. Now, this allocation of business means that these two items will no longer with IT, they will come to INB. Now, INB, having been with it, at it, got it, I can assure you, has an internal hegemony that arises out of helplessness. That arises out of sheer helplessness. The whole world is going around with them nothing to do. So these two items have now come into the allocation of business. These are not laws, but they give you intent of which way the laws will go. And if we take them seriously, government would bring in some regulation in exercise of powers conferred upon it from thin air and try to ram it through parliament. So that's a style. And then, of course, when you ran too many things too fast through parliament, you get farmers at cross borders waiting. So here, that's the first legal position. Second is, I have always questioned, even on that chair, that what is our legitimate power? The Constitution has but two entries in the Union list. One is Section 31, which says broadcasting and other like means. Now, how much can you stretch it? How much can you stretch this term broadcasting and other like means? How much can you stretch? That's a question that needs to be tested in the 7th or 8th decade of the Indian Constitution. We must need to test it. You can't let everything go scot-free. The second power is under entry 60, which is rather clear that you can certify films for exhibition. Certify films for exhibition. So one entry of the Union list of the Constitution of India has triggered off this Parkinson's apparatus of a huge hegemonic ministry that even hegemonizes on its own creatures like Prasar Bharati. But having said, This is not yet operational. That's the first statement I was making. Second is, even without operating it, they have started acting in a manner which the speakers have mentioned, Tarun has mentioned, Nikhil has also mentioned about filing cases. Now, this gimmick has to be observed and tackled. These hurt citizens who are going on filing cases are actually creating cause of action for the cat to jump in between two monkeys and adjudicate. Am I clear? This one is a got up case. So I would recommend civil society to be equally industrious and think of matters that offend their sensibilities, like Khajuraho temples, and ask them that they are offending my sensibility, cover them up with white sheets or black sheets. So this game can go on. They are going on filing, and the moment a person files, he's slapped with a 295A. Yeah, the first section that should have come in is 153A. 153A, which punishes people with 2 to 5 years imprisonment, 2 to 5 years imprisonment for injuring the sentiments of a community, any community, should have been applied about 10,781 times after May 2014. I mean, that's my own guess. That has never been applied. So you are all being caught in a game, number one. The best news that I heard today from Tarun is that you are going ahead and declaring your own self-made code of conduct. And that is one smart way of outwitting, anyway, we'll not use terms, them. We'll not use terms. So that one. Now, the legality of the program code rests upon the section, 2 sections, in fact, 19 and 20 of the Cable Network Act. The cable network is only 9 crore viewers, households. Remember, you are extending that to cover 10.5 crore viewers who are in the satellite domain. And God knows how many viewers are in the terrestrial domain. So you are extending your, stretching your chewing gum until it breaks. So this is no way you can go about in a legitimate society. So these issues, if they are taken up for further consideration and it doesn't go to user-friendly judge somewhere, you can expect a certain amount of fairness, even now. So these need to be agitated. As I've said, tenuous legality of actions, the entire pyramid apparatus of, well, regulation and bureaucracy that has been created on the basis of two straw-like sections, then jumping to act on the basis of people who are so grievously hurt because somebody has kissed somebody in front of a temple. I mean, what if the other reverse had happened? Would he be pleased? So they are stretching it illogically, and this series of hurt cases, as I call it, has also to be factored in by liberal society. So right now, there is very little that they can really do about OCCP. The other point of view that has already been given, that what do you do about self-generated internet content? There's very little. They're in a very tricky area, and the more nimble person is the one who should get away legally. Of course, if that legal part has already not been taken care of, another Rajya Sabha seat or something. I mean, so in a normal course, I see a lot of scope for taking it up squarely, fairly, and legally. As I said, I am deeply hurt now. Of course, it's only late, nearing as I come to my 70th year. I'm deeply hurt at what I see on Khajuraho. I really might go in for a deeply hurt case sometime. So let's take things as they come. Let's understand the strategies and work accordingly. Hegemony will be part of bureaucracy. It's a genetic release that goes in and hits the brain somewhere. I know it for certain because I worked with them for 40 years. I mean, so we know. that can be curbed only by a nuisance greater than it from outside.
Okay.
This, otherwise, if you let it, this government would let its panzers roll through all cornfields of protest.
Thank you, Mr. Sircar. So
Hmm.
let's move away from the streaming platforms and let's focus on digital news media now. So, Dhanya, you are not just the editor of an online news portal, you are also the chairperson of DigiPub, which is an association of several news media publishing, news publishing platforms, digital news publishing platforms, I beg your pardon. So, what do you make of this FDI cap in digital news? I mean, do you think the government, by regulating digital news media's access to capital, is indirectly trying to control them?
Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Dhanya, ma'am, please unmute.
Sorry, I have a child running around in the room, so I keep muting myself while others are talking, and then I forget to unmute myself. So, of course, there is absolutely no doubt that it is going to be restrictive. I think we should first start by looking at who exactly has welcomed this move. Now, a lot of newspapers have been writing about the government announcing this policy. The only people who have been the big media houses that run either television channels or newspapers or both, and also their own digital portals. So for them, an FDI cap does not matter, or it helps them to basically carve out their digital businesses to seek separate valuations for it. So these are the only people who have actually been welcoming it. The others, like us, for example, apprehensive about an FDI cap. It is clearly restrictive, though when the government announced it, they tried to make it look as if, oh, it's a favor that we're doing it to you, that we are allowing 26% FDI, we are opening up the sector. That's not reality. We know that till now, no cap. There were sites which were run, which were sold to foreign entities. There was FDI. So the whole point is that government tried to sort of act like they were doing a favor, but they were not. They were restricting. The one thing we need to understand is that what are the two main things that the government is trying to control? One is digital news platforms, and the second is OTT platforms. I think this move basically stems from the fact that the government of today is very apprehensive about both digital media and OTT platforms. See, unlike TV or print, where the government has controlled in many different ways, whether it's by restricting advertisement or other things, digital media and OTT platforms have largely stayed out of the government purview that way, and they function independently. So when the government is wary of these digital portals and of OTT, I'm only going to talk about digital news sites now. When the government is wary, it also means that people who want to invest in these digital sites, especially the independent, smaller digital sites, are also shrinking because they don't want government action on them or government wrath on them, right? In this scenario, when already it is difficult for digital news sites, you are further restricting them by capping FDI. And also, it's arbitrary. 49% is what the government allows for television channels, for example, when it comes to FDI for them. A linear medium like television is being allowed 49%. Why is it 26% for digital? So there's really no explanation from the government. I mean, I don't know when and if that explanation will ever come. Like, how is the government going to explain why it was decided 49% for television and 26% for internet, when internet is seamless, it is vast, and it is borderless? The other main problem that I think is that it is ambiguous. See, if you look at what the government has said, it has said that social media platforms and search engines which upload or stream content from India. What does that mean? There are so many news websites which, first thing, do not operate in India. Like, for example, let's take the international news websites, right? Most of them cover news in India, which means they essentially operate out of India, but they're uploading, their companies are all based out. Like, for example, BBC functions very much. They have an India bureau. They work out of India. They also report. So the rules will not apply to them, right? Because they as a company, they are established outside India. Now, when they say uploading or streaming from India, there are also Indian companies which upload from somewhere else, which will like Singapore or some other place. So won't these FDI caps then apply to those people. So there's a lot of ambiguity. I mean, what is the government trying to say? Is it creating an unfair ground here where international players who are existing outside India can actually operate if they want a news system? Are we forcing the smaller Indian companies to uproot themselves from India and maybe go and register outside India? And this whole thing that they gave while moving everyone to the INB ministry, they said that anyone who does news on the internet, who does it anyone include? There are thousands and lakhs of people who actually do some kind of news on the internet, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. What is the government wanting to control? What is the government wanting to regulate? There is definitely lack of clarity, and we are not getting any clarity because there has been no dialogue. So the minimum I think we can expect from the government is that they will have a dialogue with stakeholders before giving us any kind of regulation.
Right. Thanks, Dhanya. Mr. Sircar, just wanted to ask you that, digital news has been around in India for many years. There was no need for FDI up until now. So what has changed? Why did the government think that it is necessary to bring in this regulation?
You see, that's only one aspect of the tightening of controls that Dhanya mentioned through equity, and it can be tackled also quite smartly. You restrict it to 26%, so that gives you overall control over the company. And since shares are not allowed, well, other instruments have not been banned. You can go in for non-convertible debentures, you can go in for loans, if that is the major issue of capital infusion. But these gentlemen have now first started with FCRA. FCRA, of course, has its plus and minuses, but the plus side was it could help liberal bodies. So that they have ensured that FCRA is cut off. Now they go in for other controls. Maybe they'll need something like an electoral bond to ensure that only they win. But never mind. The major issue is not of controlling, to me at least. It's not the question of who's controlling the online news, the digital news. It's what they are saying. This domain is perhaps the only one with a few one or two crank online Sarkari onlines also there. But this is the only last refuge of the voice of freedom. I write for many of them, and I understand the philosophy behind most of them. I've never understood which side Shekhar is blowing, but that's a private issue. So this digital news is the only bold personification of the ongoing resistance. This is the resistance that we are up. It's comparable to any other resistance movement. And this one, they have to keep pricking so that some thanedar can call you at a comfortable hour of 1 o'clock at night and ask you questions. That's the whole idea, to extend the overreach to see how much harassment can be caused. Effectively, they can't do much. So let's not overjump. With the press, with the printing media, they could do jolly little, excepting providing employment to an ex-judge with a white ambassador, and now I think white something else. So that the press council couldn't really come in. Defamation is a different ball game that hasn't succeeded. SLAP is the new instrument of the double A's, A&A and their lawyers. We'll all have to suffer it. So even with deliberate attempts to control the print media, which was synonymous with press, they have not succeeded so far. What they have done is buy them up, pulverize them. They have these two Alsatians with them, pulverize them, raid them, or bring them to their knees through other methods, non-constitutional method. So here, when you are talking the constitutional domain, the legal domain, there's only little they can do about it, even if they have things. If they exceed in punishment and punitive measures, it would attract equality of treatment under law. That I think Tarun had already raised. So this is basically an attempt to subjugate. And maybe if I were you, I would not even go in for a discussion. They will find their Godi onlines. A few of them exist, so they'll find some Godi onlines to keep talking. You go ahead and declare your own code of conduct, your own code, and stay blissfully away from government. The farther you stay away, the healthier it is. So stay away. That is my advice.
So Nikhil,
anything else?
So Nikhil, I wanted to ask you, the other day when we were chatting, you mentioned actually whether this curb on FDI cap, could it be regarded as a free speech issue? You were mentioning that there was a case where the courts had held that the curb on newsprint was a free speech issue, right? Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, but first, Shuma, let me just say that I could hear Mr. Sircar for an hour. This entire discussion could have been just with him, and I don't think I would have minded that. Just to add to what Mr. Sircar said, I just want to. You should remember that this government has no love lost for the press. If you recall, we had a situation where one of the ministers, the Minister of State, when this government came into power, labeled the press as prostitutes, right? And the biggest thorn in their side has been the digital media. It has been YouTubers who are been actively criticizing the government, been pointed out inconsistencies. And some of the foreign press, especially if you look at the work that the Huffington Post has done, the HuffPost before it was shut down now, some stellar work happening online across multiple publications. Now, look, there are, my argument is that, just like in the BCCL case many years ago, the government was not allowed to restrict the availability of newsprint because that was seen as a curb on free speech and a restriction of free speech. I don't see why the restriction of foreign funding for digital news isn't the digital equivalent of doing the same. In fact, I'm quite surprised that none of the print media has actually challenged the 26% restriction on foreign funding as a disproportionate restriction on free speech. But I suspect that they tend to gain from that situation because they don't want foreign competition. And digital media actually emerged as competition for traditional media organizations. In fact, when Prakash Javadekar first announced the 26% restriction last year, he said two things. One, he said that they are supporting media by enabling FDI of 26%, which was absolutely false because it used to be 100%. And that was proven when News Corp bought VC Circle in 2015. And the second thing he said was that the media organizations had asked for this. There is no digital-only media organization that went and asked for this, and it's probably the traditional publications that have asked for this restriction because it suits them to restrict, to bring everyone down to their level, because they're dominant at their own level, right? The other thing, is that the government could argue that it needs to restrict foreign funding in digital media because it can be a national security issue. But if you want to consider another example of how the pen is mightier than the sword, we should remember that the FDI in defense is 74%. So, you don't need further proof about how dangerous the government considers free press. And I don't think it's just this government. If you remember in 2008, when Rupert Murdoch was, 2007, 2008, when Rupert Murdoch was in India, he went and met Manmohan Singh. I think it was 2007. He went and met Manmohan Singh just prior to the elections and lobbied for an increase in FDI in print because he wanted nothing more than a newspaper in India at that time. And it was, and Manmohan Singh didn't give him that, right? So I think any government wants to restrict foreign funding in the media, and they want to have their means of controlling the media. It's not just foreign funding, by the way. There is also the RPP bill, which was also which there was a consultation on last December, which looks at a registration mechanism for digital media. What is not clear to me is, number one, where in law is news defined? and how does the government define news? And second, the media publications are being restricted, what about everyone else in the country? Because for me, journalism is an act. It's not an organization or an entity. It's not a qualification as such. Anyone today can report news on social media, and so are they going to restrict YouTube channels as well? And what other restrictions will come on those who don't need to raise funding and in fact are crowdfunded, where people are donating money to them in order so that they can provide the news that they want. So I don't think this has ended yet, and frankly, I hope that there's going to be a situation where media organizations can go and challenge such regressive policies, on the grounds that it's an unconstitutional restriction to free speech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to ask you about the news aggregators, because Dhanya mentioned how ambiguous these regulations are. I mean, this particular regulation. So if it also extends to the news aggregators, I mean, Google and Facebook are also news aggregators, and many of them do have Indian entities, right? So would it apply to them as well?
So it does apply to them, but I don't know whether it applies to, for example, Google News or Facebook or WhatsApp, where news is actively also shared, because they are also, in effect, aggregators of news. The word aggregator is not defined anywhere in law for a news aggregator. In just the same way that, for example, streaming services are not defined under law, or in any clarification that the government has come out with. News organizations are not defined. So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here. But yeah, the concern about aggregators actually comes from the Doklam standoff, where there were people in the MHA who I believe were concerned about Chinese news aggregators like UC News and News Dog, both of which have now been banned earlier this year, when the Chinese apps were banned, which were perhaps surfacing a point of view that was more that leaning towards the Chinese point of view rather than the Indian point of view on the Doklam standoff. And that risk does remain, but I don't think banning these apps and regulating those apps and aggregators from India is going to make any difference, because this is the internet. You can download anything you want from anywhere in the world and use it. So just like you can set up a news publication in Singapore and you can service the Indian market from there. So, I think this is a fool's errand to try and restrict this domain. And it's probably, like I was saying earlier, that 10 years down the line, perhaps the bureaucrats in the IND ministry won't have a role to play if everything is digital and it's not highly regulated like print or television or for example, radio. And they probably want to ensure that they have something to do then, which is why they're trying to restrict free speech in this manner.
Exactly. So, Dhanya, do you agree? I mean, would you say that this FDI cap in digital news could be used to check dissent and, discourage stories that maybe are critical of the government? Could it be leveraged?
See, I don't think the FDI cap in itself can do anything to content or people, right? But these are all various ways, right, in which the government tries to control industry, tries to ensure that the industry follows those rigid policies the government puts across. So I think this is just the beginning. And as Nikhil was saying, this is something which we had all been expecting. I mean, I've heard Nikhil speak about this many times at different events, but the sure signal that the government is going to do something like this came when this Sudarshan TV's case started in the Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court asked them about this UPSC Jihad show, the government said that if we want to regulate anyone, it would be the digital media. So at that time, it became clear that it's only a matter of days or weeks that the government is going to make an announcement. And see, this is just the first step. The FDI announcement is the first step. What more are they going to do? They have said that regulations will be brought in, which is what I said. The ambiguity still exists, right? Who all does the government want to bring under their umbrella? What do they propose to do with these people? But I think all of this stems from the fact that the government is apprehensive about digital news sites and OTT platforms both whom have content or journalism which is not exactly what the government expects, and the government doesn't. The government wants to ensure that there is some
Yes.
control in
Let us
different
not.
ways.
I mean, that's a very valid point. That what more may follow after this, because let us not forget that a former INB minister, she was trying to set up a committee that would frame rules to regulate digital news, online news. So, and that happened just about 2.5 years ago. Mr. Sircar.
Yeah. Incidentally, she didn't understand much beyond soap operas, and but when that advantage notwithstanding, I've been saying that this area is very open. It's legally quite open. It has a lot of treacherous bends here and there, but if you have clarity of mind and if you have unity of purpose, you can negotiate, can walk in through this tricky area. That's what I'm saying, that the legality of everything. Now, if the legality is, or the lack of legality is absolutely beyond doubt, but their lordships don't agree, then that's a different case altogether. If all ban is put in, we can always use courier pigeons, God knows what, but you can't get me to shut up. We can start a pigeon industry if required. Don't worry. You can't stop voices like this. You can't stop voices like this. This can't. I mean, A, the legality, B, your capability to scrutinize with that EMMC. Do you know Big Brother watching you? All TV channels are watched through EMMC. I've been to that office. Nothing could be checked.
And just bring in Tarun once more. Tarun, are you there?
Yeah.
Just to, I mean, the whole free speech issue, and you have told us that the self-regulatory code is being pretty much accepted the way it has been, which is very good news. But this constant pressure of having to please everybody or not give offense, does it also not create pressure on the OTTs to could it not be kind of again used as a means to stifle narratives that are, social, political, cultural narratives that the government may not like, the powers that be may not like?
So you must start from where content gets created, Shuma. Great content always gets created from the left brain, right? And people who end up making great content are generally, by and large, liberals. They see the society as not what it is, but what it should be and what it ideally ought to be. Now, when you think of that, and when you think of the left and right brain, you are generally always going to get concepts that are going to want to project the society to be slightly more progressive, right, slightly more accommodating, slightly more accepting, newer ideas, whether it's religious tolerance, whether it's LGBT, whether it's preferences of the way you want to live life, and so on and so forth. Good makers are not going to come or get cowed down by issues like that. They will continue to make, and we as platform creative people, when we start to filter our content, we'll never find the filter of uniqueness going through shows which are all but insipid, right? So to answer your question, we go through so much research before we put a show out, that only if there is a great liberal, left-leaning, variety, unique kind of show will it go through our neuro research to even get made. The more of the same will work for no one.
Yeah, but you do also exercise a fair amount of self-censorship. You do that.
I don't think there is self-censorship. I think everybody is responsible. And I think being self-responsible and self-censorship is two different things. I can tell you, a lot of shows have abuse for abuse sake. Right? Do you need it? Do you need to use a swear word in every sentence the way you speak? Is that required, or is that my badge of free speech that I will do what I want to. People still do that. But do you need it or you don't need it is a question sometimes you need to ask yourself.
Okay, fair enough. I think we've kind of have to leave it there. We are almost at the end of our allotted time, and IIC has told us that they're going to cut us off at 5 p.m. sharp. So it has been a fantastic discussion, very stimulating, informative, and we've had multiple perspectives. And
I think Mr. Sircar's perspective has been the supreme perspective on this platform.
I wish we had more time. And certainly for Mr. Sircar, we definitely need more time. And
the government is like a toilet. You have to have it. You cannot cannot live without it.
That's the quote of the day, right? So many thanks to all the panelists. Appreciate your joining us here. And thank you very much, India International Center, for collaborating with New Media Foundation and hosting the event. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.